question be now put.
I call the Right Honourable David Carter.
Madam Chair, and as this debate resumes today, the body language and the pain on the government's faces passing legislation they don't agree with has got no better. And as we debate this, my colleagues have mentioned how sad a day it is for New Zealand democracy that potentially this legislation is about to put us in the esteemed company of a country like Zimbabwe. So why I rise today to debate Clause 7, new Clause 7, because as an opposition member absolutely opposed to the Electoral Integrity Amendment Bill, this opposition has a duty to attempt to make this legislation better. We're going to have to, at the end of the day, as indeed the Minister, the Honourable Andrew Little, has had to do, swallow a dirty big rat to satisfy the inadequacies of Mr Peters' interpersonal skills with his own caucus. That is what this is about. We attempted last night in Clause 5 to put a sunset clause on it, to allow this legislation.
I apologise for interrupting the member. I would require us to come back to the specificity.
And I'm about to do that if I get a chance.
That would be great.
Madam
We've
Chair.
gone a minute
I
and
was
a half.
attempting to point out to Madam Chair that we have a responsibility to attempt to make this legislation better. I was attempting to point out we had tried to do that last night with an amendment to Clause 5 that had been voted down. And now what we have is Clause 7, which attempts to put in place the requirement that rules be developed by a political party and that those rules be transparent. And we heard Mr Little, the Honourable Andrew Little, in his contribution a minute ago saying political parties must be free to make their own rules. With that, I agree with Mr Little. But where I think I disagree with Mr Little is, having developed those party rules, they should be known to us all. They should be clear. They should be transparent. And this is why this legislation, this amendment, is so important. And the reason this is important is because New Zealand First had some rules that were published and available on a website requiring a member like Derek Ball to pledge $300,000 if he was at any time tempted not to remain a loyal member of the New Zealand First caucus. What that means is that Mr Peters put in place a rule whereby he ensured the complete cooperation of Mr Derek Ball on any issue at all, so that Mr Derek Ball's conscience was in effect transferred without question to his master. An absolute puppet clause. And then when it got Mr Peters into trouble, suddenly that rule has disappeared from the website, and despite Mr Peters saying that Mr Ball had signed that particular enforcement notice, Mr Peters then changed his mind and said no member had. And that's why I think Clause 7 is a genuine attempt, a very genuine attempt, Madam Chair, to improve this legislation. If we're going to see this dreadful legislation passed that puts us in the company of Robert Mugabe, of all people, puts us in the company of Robert Mugabe, let's see if we can make it better. And this clause, advanced by my colleague Chris Pink, is a very well-worded clause. It is simple. It simply says parties must develop the rules by which membership is covered, and also the expulsion of a member from a party membership is clearly exposed. And I think that would make bad legislation better. And therefore I implore members on the other side of the House, the Greens, Labor and New Zealand First members, who I think most actually deeply oppose this legislation, but they've been whipped into line. We know the trade-off between the Electoral Integrity Bill and the mining bills. The Greens got the mining ban. New Zealand First got this waka jumping bill agreement through. That's the trade-off. But I do say to members of the government, at least as we go through the final stages of this debate, consider new clause 7 carefully.
I call the Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I wanted to follow up